Green Sabre. Video time again, episode 3 and the spooky episode. So yeah, essentially it's going to be our top 10 horror films decided as a band. I say decided as a band, everyone had their input, but of course this is my collection that I'm going through, so you might find that the majority of mine made the top 10 and so on and so forth. So anyway, but I can assure you it's a democracy. Everyone had an input. But there's a few that some of the lads wanted on the list that I don't have, that I'm not a fan of. But I'll explain all that in due course if I remember. There's quite a lot to get through. So there's not going to be any great sort of in-depth on a lot of these. They're mainly going to be just a kind of very sort of quick. I've realised that both episodes that I've done so far of these videos have come in at like 30 minutes plus, which in the grand scheme of things isn't too long. But for me, that's quite a long time. So I look like I've got a witch's hat on, by the way. That's my spooky lantern for the spooky episode. It's got the witch's hat on. So anyway, right, without further ado, it's going to be a top 10 Green Sabre's favourite horror flicks. But firstly, I'm going to do the ones that were so close to getting on that top 10, but didn't quite make it. So we're going to start with The Shining. Now, unfortunately, it's on a scrap of paper to remind me, because I do have this on DVD. I can't find it. I must have packed it away, and I don't know why I would have done. All my horror ones are out, generally speaking, apart from 1 or 2. or 3 in this case. But yeah, very close to making it The Shining. Great psychological horror. And one of the very few Stephen King adaptations that are any good, personally. Although Stephen King would tell you that he thought this was dreadful. I like it though. I love the sort of sense of menace and threat, and just that deterioration in the Jack Torrance character, the Jack Nicholson character. Sorry, as the Torrance character. Yeah, I think played brilliantly. Atmospheric's great. The look of the hotel and the landscape and so on. Yeah, I think it's great. Very close, but didn't make the top 10. Nor did this. Nosferatu. Classic, you know, you could say the sort of genre-defining vampire movie. It's a shame that they couldn't get the rights to Dracula, so they had to change his name to Count Orlok or whatever it was. But a classic, just creepy as hell. Looks brilliant and works great. The version I've got, I feel like I've seen a few versions of this that have got different soundtracks ever so slightly. And the version I've got on this one, because of course it's a silent movie, and the kind of classical soundtrack that they use on this is quite imposing, almost to the point that it detracts from the movie, I would say personally. But still, it's a bona fide classic. It didn't quite make the top 10. One of several John Carpenter that we'll see soon, but this one didn't make it. I did, for most of this week leading up to this, I had this in the top 10, and it just got bumped out because I've remembered one that will become apparent soon that needs to be in the top 10 that I'd forgotten about. I love this film. Yeah, does it work in general as a... There are issues with some of the plot line and various things, but other than that, I think the story's great. I think the atmospherics are great, and I think with very little apart from a dry ice machine, or several, I think they do a tremendous job of really sort of creating suspense and spookiness. So yeah, very close, but didn't quite make the top 10. These were the first one especially with Gaz's choice, the Conjuring films. I think the first one's brilliant. I quite like the second one, to be honest, because it's got the sort of use of the nun character in it. I think the first one's the better of the two. I think they're fabulous films, and I think I forget the name of the director now, but whoever it is that does these, he's kind of mastered the jump scare. And he just does them brilliantly. They're kind of well timed, and they're just really creepy and good looking films. And yeah, close, but no cigar. But yeah, really good films, worth a mention. So, sorry guys, didn't make the top 10 after all that. The last one, very close to making the top 10, is this. The Orphanage. Spanish subtitled film. Absolutely fantastic. Went to the cinema to watch this. And yeah, just the creepiness of it. Done absolutely fabulously. If you haven't seen this, you really need to see it. And if you've got issues with sort of subtitle films and stuff, just get over it, because you really are missing out if you haven't seen this. Terrific film. Terrific sort of ghost movie, if you will, as such. Few ghost movies to mention. So anyway, so those are the ones that didn't quite make the top 10. So I'm going to start on the top 10 now. We'll go 10 through 6, and then we'll have a mentions list for others that probably didn't work. But anyway, I'll get there. I'm preempting myself. So we're going to start number 10 on Greensabreuk's top horror movie list. The Omen. This is the trilogy box set. The original one, the Gregory Peck one. Just outstanding. Doesn't mess around. Creepy, scary, great story. Like I say, gets to the point. Tremendous. The second one is all right, has its moments. The third one is an absolute fucking disaster, personally, of a film. But I can kind of forgive it. They remade the original, which I didn't think it was bad, but the kid in this 1976 original there's just the creepiest vibe about him that they did not capture in the remake, personally. Everything else was done pretty well, but if you haven't seen it, and I'll be amazed if you haven't, you've got to watch the 1976 original. Stunning film from start to finish, and comes in at today's Greensabre Horror number 10. Following that, number 9, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Is it faithful to the book? Not really. But I think what he does is really good, and I think the performances help it. If you can ignore Keanu Reeves' fucking diabolical English accent in it. But I think Gary Oldman's fantastic in it. I think Anthony Hopkins as well. I don't know if there might be a lot said about his performance, but I think it's just hammy brilliance. I think he over-eggs it superbly in this film. I just think it's great. It's a sort of love story, really. But I just think the atmospherics that it creates, I think, is a real... Although it might not follow the book faithfully, I think it follows the vibe absolutely to a T. Effects are still pretty good in it and stuff, and I just think it's a great story. Is it a bit overlong? Maybe. But I love how they kind of create the backstory behind it, which a lot of other Dracula films haven't really done. I do like a vampire flick, and we'll get to that, no doubt, shortly. But I think this is a great one. It took quite a lot of a battering with the critics, but I'm not really sure why. I think it's a great film from start to finish, and I'll always watch it. So number 9, Dracula. Number 8, the original and prototype, and another John Carpenter film, Halloween, the first one. A great movie. And now, shock horror. I'm not an enormous fan of slasher movies. I think that they're all the fucking same, quite frankly. And this did it better than any of them. Every other slasher movie is just an imitation of this. And like I said, I can take or leave slasher movies. I just find them a bit boring, personally. And they've all kind of worked on that sort of teenage trope of it's all teenage kid. And to be quite honest, I don't give a fuck about any of them. I kind of want them all to die in the films. So, whereas this one, I thought gave you that kind of, you could sympathise with them and stuff. And it's the prototype, it's the pioneer. And John Carpenter used to make some tremendous films. He kind of fell off a cliff around vampires. I quite like vampires. It's not mentioned in my list. I don't have it on DVD. It's all right. But I feel like he just fell off a cliff after that, really. And the less said about Ghosts of Mars, the better. But again, that's just my opinion. But yeah, the original and finest slasher movie, Halloween. Number 8 in our list. Number 7 coming in. I feel like it should be a bit higher. And this is the one that I forgot. And it's only the first one that is a horror film. So it's Alien, the first one. This is my Blu-ray box set of all 4. But the first one, my good friend John off Rock and Metal Plus, last year he did a top 10 horror video countdown. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. Rock and Metal Plus. It's really good. A few similar choices in there. Alien was in that with him, and I agreed totally with him where he said the first one's really the only horror. The second one, which I love, Aliens, I would say is more a sci-fi action film. It's more action than horror, I would say. The third one I quite like, the Prison Island, the low budget one. And on this one, there's a few extra bits in the third one, which is all right. The fourth one, Resurrection, I thought was fucking dreadful. But I'll watch it if it's on, one of them. And I'm one of the few that I really enjoy the prequels. I think Prometheus and what's the other one called? Covenant, Alien Covenant. I quite like them. I think they do work in the story. I'm not really sure what everyone's problem was with them. They're not a patch on the original. And that's why the original makes it to number seven in the list. Just classic. Just suspense and really ramps it up. It never lets up. And, I mean, I'm assuming everyone's seen the original Alien. If you haven't, you've got to go and watch it. And Aliens as well. And maybe the third one. Probably don't bother after that. Number 6. And just missing out on the top 5. Now, this is the remake. I don't have the original. But I'm putting it... I love this remake, by the way. But I'm putting... It's the original Dawn of the Dead that I think should make the top 10. Because it was groundbreaking, and it was such a great bit of work on the zombie movie as such, like the genre of zombie films. I love the way that they set it in the shopping mall, and the creeping death of consumerism as such. What I thought it was a really good nod to, and based on the old zombies creeping about the place really slowly. This one, the remake, brings in the fast zombies, the running ones, the ones that can jump over stuff, which I think is great. I quite like them sort of films. It's a good sort of modern twist on the zombie film. Kind of misses the point of it though, because like I say, I think that the whole scariness of the original zombies with just the relentless wave of it that very, very slowly will get you in the end. And what the original Dawn of the Dead, I think, does perfectly. So at number 6, the original Dawn of the Dead. But the remake's not bad. It wouldn't make my top 10 though, the remake, but yeah, it's alright. So that's number 10 through 6. Before we get to the top 5, a few honourable mentions. A few vampire ones to start off with. This, if you haven't seen it. And watch this one. This is the Swedish version, subtitled version. The American remake of it is alright. It didn't really need making though. Because this one does a perfectly good job of it. But a terrific vampire film. Let the right one in. The book's pretty good as well. But yeah, again, if you've not seen this, tremendous. Really good. You've got to watch that. So, yeah, a few honourable mentions. Would it be in my top 10? Probably not, because it's not. But yeah, worth a mention. Another one. Interview with the Vampire. I think this is a really, really good film. The books are tremendous. I think the Vampire Lestat, which is part 2 of the trilogy, is my favourite of the Anne Rice books. But this is a very, very worthy film adaptation of the first part. I think Tom Cruise is fabulous in this. And what's she called? Kirsten Dunst as the child in it is really good as well. And it's just a really great atmosphere that it creates, and it's that kind of I suppose it's one of the first ones that kind of romanticise almost the whole vampire thing, but it does it brilliantly, and it's one of the pioneers of that. And what I also liked about the story was the Brad Pitt character it was one of the first to do that take on vampire, that he didn't really want to be a vampire. He never adapted to it, which I thought was kind of a good take on it, really. So yeah, not quite, but an honourable mention, Interview with the Vampire. Another great vampire flick, Lost Boys. I love this film, I think it's great. It's a more sort of comedy horror as such. But I'll always watch it when it's on. I think it's tremendous. I think the story's great, and again, it's another one of them that doesn't mess around. It kind of gets straight to the point and cracks on from there. And the greased up sax guy. What film wouldn't benefit from the greased up sax guy? singing I Still Believe. So, really, for that on its own, it should have been at number 1. But it doesn't make the top 10, but an honourable mention, Lost Boys. A vampire sideswipe now. And if you haven't seen any of these, this is, I'll get a bit closer. It's like a Hong Kong cinema, Mr. Vampire. This is a great film. If you like vampires that do kung fu and hop around the place, then what are you waiting for? Check this out. I saw this first originally years ago. I think it was either 92 or 93, something like that. Channel 4 did a season of Hong Kong horror. This was one of them. I think there was another one called like Close Encounters of the Spooky Kind, or somewhat along those lines. But just fabulous. Great horrors, very tongue-in-cheek, amazing kung fu in them fight scenes and stuff. So yeah, check this out, Mr. Vampire. If you've not heard about it, go and get it watched. Honourable mention. I love this. Sleepy Hollow. I think that the Headless Horseman, a Ichabod Crane story and all of that, I think it's a great story that not many people have done decent adaptations of. And this is one of the few decent adaptations. All in Tim Burton style, of course. So if you're not a fan of Tim Burton stuff, then you're probably not going to be a fan of this in reality. But I love the atmosphere that it creates and the slightly over-the-top soundtrack with it all. But it looks fabulous. And again, doesn't mess around, just sort of cracks on from start to finish. But a great little film, that. I do like Sleepy Hollow. So honourable mention. A further honourable mention is for 30 Days a Night. I'd still maybe only score this like 5 or 6 out of 10 though. I think there's some amazing... There's a particular scene in it where the vampire carnage has begun. And they do like an aerial shot, a bird's eye view shot of just all this carnage taking place. That in itself probably warrants 5 or 6 points. It's an amazing bit of cinematography and I love how they film that. And the vampires are sort of terrifying in a really weird way. Some of them just look a bit strange, but I love that kind of, it does, as I spoke about the vampire romanticism earlier, it does away with all of that. It's just carnage from start to finish. And there's some fairly shockingly gory scenes in it. And as you may have gathered so far, I'm not an enormous fan of gore for the sake of it. It's got to warrant it being there. I'm not a fan of like Saw and Hostel and all that fucking bollocks. I think that they're cheap. They don't really do anything. There's not much of a story there. It's just gore for the sake of it. And I don't see the point in that personally. I know that there are lots that do, but I don't. So anyway, I digress. This I really like. And again, it's another one of them. I'll watch it when it's on because the premise of it, you know, like Alaska, the fact that it's locked off, and it's a really good story that they work it around. Again, it's not without its limitations. And one of the major limitations for me, and I can't watch it without sort of giggling to myself, is the terrible vampire language. I know that was part of it, and this is a comic book, I believe, isn't it, and so on. But it's all a bit Team America. They just, the vampire language is all baka laka daka kaka, and it sounds fucking ridiculous. And it does spoil it. It does detract from it because I shouldn't be laughing at that point when they start on with it. But I always do. But I'll always watch it. I think it's a great film. Very violent, though. But, yeah, decent vampire flick. Another decent vampire flick. It just takes me back to my childhood. The original Fright Night. The second one's a bit shite, to be honest. But this one's... And the remake that they did with Colin Farrell. But this one, the Chris Sarandon one, and Roddy McDowall, fantastic. Great film. It just takes me back to my childhood. It's... If you want a great and the head vampire, some of his sweaters that he wears in this film, outstanding. Great 80s vampire film. If you like 80s films, vampire films, combine them together to make a load of cheesy nonsense that's great to watch. Fright Night, brilliant film, worthy mention. Almost there. If those of you that follow me on Facebook, you'll have noticed that I watched this recently. What Lies Beneath. I think this is terrific. The chemistry between Pfeiffer and Ford isn't particularly believable at times in there. But I think Harrison Ford makes a brilliant bad guy. Oh, spoiler alert, by the way, sorry. I think Harrison Ford makes a great bad guy in it. Sorry if you haven't seen this. I may have just given a large chunk of the plot away. But anyway, I think it's tremendous. I love the fact that it's clearly a homage to, what's he called? The guy that did Psycho and, Hitchcock. It's clearly a homage to Hitchcock films. Even with the soundtrack as well. I love the score to this film. I forget who does it, but it's straight out of the Bernard Herrmann book. Like for the Hitchcock's Vertigo soundtrack is one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. It's just fabulous. And this is definitely a homage to that Hitchcock, Bernard Herrmann type sort of arrangement. A great ghost story. Fabulous. And there's not enough great ghost stories for me out there. And this is one of them. And if you don't like it, you're wrong. I don't make the rules. Well, I do. It's my video. Anyway, the final honourable mention. And this should have been number one, quite honestly. The Monster Club. One of the greatest horrors ever made. If you've not seen it, why? It's fabulous. It's got Vincent Price in it. It's got various other people in it. And so it's basically like 3-part stories. But the premise that it's in a club full of monsters. What it says on the tin. I probably didn't need to explain that anyway. And some of the special effects are shockingly bad. Especially the dance club scenes. And it mixes like contemporary music at the time I had, because it really has not aged well at all. But if you want something that's just daft, with 3 decent spooky stories sort of thrown in, the last one's the best. The guy that's like a film producer or a director that goes looking for a location, that's my favourite. But there's a really good one about a vampire with Donald Pleasance in it. If you've not seen this, where have you been? The Monster Club, one of the greatest horror films ever made. Right, I've realised we've already hit like 21 minutes or something, so I've rambled as fucking usual. So let's crack on with the top 5. I've kind of forgotten about the other lads. Bri mentioned a few. I think he might have mentioned Conjuring and stuff like that. Rossi mentioned a few. Lost Boys was in there and so on and so forth. What was one of the... Texas Chainsaw Massacre was mentioned. That was very close to getting in my top 10, and that was another one that I don't think I actually have on DVD for some reason. I don't know why. But the original, yeah, again, it's a sort of prototype. The master of that kind of horror film. So let's get on to the top 5. Now, Evil Dead. I do have the original, the first one, on a kind of like weird squidgy Book of the Dead box set that's Ace. I must have packed it for some reason though. Probably because it's one of those weird shaped ones that doesn't fit in a collection anywhere. So, yeah. But Evil Dead 2's right up there as well. Essentially a remake of the first one, but just with more daft bits in it. And it's probably sacrilege, but I think the second one's my favourite. I do like the Army of Darkness as well, the third one, but again, that's more of a comedy than it is a horror, really. But Evil Dead films, they were groundbreaking. It was one of them that we talked about at high school when we come out. Have you seen the Evil Dead films? Like, nobody knew anyone that had got a dodgy copy of it or whatever it is at the time. Then we all watched it, and it was like nothing else you'd seen before. It's probably dated to hell now. Well, it has. I've watched it fairly recently. And I think that's where they breathed new life into it by adding that slightly comedic element to the second one onwards. But just fantastic. Classic, gory, monster fest, haunted shack in the middle of nowhere. Evil Dead has to be in everyone's top 10, certainly. It just made my top 5. Just pipping Dawn of the Dead, I should say. It was really close where I put those two. But anyway, coming in at number 4. Now, there'll be a gasp from some of you. It's like, only number 4? The Exorcist. Should it be higher? Yeah, probably. But I have got good reasons why it's not quite as high. When you see my top 3. But, again, absolutely groundbreaking. And terrifying as well. And one of them that you can't, personally, you kind of think, it won't have aged well though, will it? I genuinely think it has. I think it's just as good now as it was when I first saw it, when I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11 or something. But fabulous, yeah. And there's a particular scene that I always love in the bit where it's like a dream sequence. He comes out of the New York subway and just it sort of fades to black, and just the demon's face flashes into the corner. And that stayed with me, did that. And probably why it's in my my top 10. But yeah, The Exorcist, all of us mentioned this film as well. So yeah, a worthy addition to the number 4 spot. Cracker. Coming in at number 3, and I'll just shake the t-shirt, the Barlow t-shirt, Salem's Lot, the David Soul original. Now, has it aged well? Not really. Have the effects aged well? Sort of. What are the performances like? Fairly fucking terrible in places. This terrified me as a child. The vampires floating at the window, absolutely, for weeks on end, I was scared of things being outside the bedroom window. I can clearly remember as a kid we were on a family holiday to Bridlington or something, and there was one night where it's this massive storm, really windy, and I could hear what I thought was scratching on the window. It turns out it was a tree outside. The branches were hitting the window, but it sounded like scratching to me, and I was terrified. And it served my mother right for even entertaining the idea of letting us watch this a few weeks earlier. So yeah, but it just brilliant. I watched this. I've lost count how many times I've watched this. I watch this every year. Every October I start doing it. Hence this video. I start doing it like I watch scary movies almost every night on the countdown to Halloween. Every year this probably gets watched at least twice. I just think it's fabulous. I think the Barlow, the Reginald, you can sort of see him there. Nothing like the book. The point I was going to make then was sort of, is it faithful to the book? Not really at all. But I love the changes that Toby Hooper made to it, like with the homage to Nosferatu, as mentioned earlier, with the Barlow character, and making him mute, silent, giving all the Barlow lines from the book to the James Mason Straker character in the film, and it just works tremendously. But this is the full 3.5 hour TV movie, 2-parter edition, put into one. That's the only version. There is a theatrical version that's about 2 hours long that cuts vast chunks of really important stuff out. Don't watch that. There is absolutely no point. This is a one, 3.5 hours, and that's still not long enough. I do wish at some point someone would do a 6-part, 1 hour long each episode miniseries. 6 hours is the only way you do this justice. I'm going to digress slightly, because I mentioned before that Stephen King stuff doesn't always adapt brilliantly. They didn't really adapt that in a sense. It just took basics of it. But another one, It, by Stephen King, is one of my favourite books of his. And I don't think either of the adaptations so far have really remotely done it justice. I think they needed to maybe tweak it like they did with this. But it's coming in at my top 3. There's lots of better horrors, technically, out there. But this one frightened me to death. And the kids floating at the window still do now. So that's why it's my number 3. Number 2, and this was so tight to decide. Number 2, An American Werewolf in London. Outstanding. Just brilliant in every way. The fact that it's a gruesome horror about werewolves and it's a comedy. Both aspects of that work. Again, no messing around, straight to the point. Terrifying. Slight side story. When we were kids, my dad had ended up with a Betamax video recorder. It was the future. Anyway, it wasn't. But we had a Betamax for some reason. I think it worked in the Middle East, and obviously like Sony stuff and stuff. It was cheaper to get stuff out there anyway. So we ended up with a Betamax video recorder. Well, when it came to the video shop in Morecambe, where we grew up, there was just like walls and walls of VHS and about 5 Betamax cassettes in the corner somewhere. So we just kept having to watch the same ones again and again. And my dad clearly got bored of the rotation of watching Piranha, Alligator, Grease, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and whatever the other one was. Well, this was one of them, and he eventually relented clearly. And even though I was 9 at the time, he decided that it would be all right to watch this. And the great part was that none of the incredible gore when people are getting shredded by a werewolf got fast-forwarded. The shower scene, fast-forward, no, inappropriate. So that was the only bit that got fast-forwarded. I love this film. Again, something I'll watch multiple times every year. It's fabulous. And the special effects still stand up today. They still look just as good now as they did back whenever this was, 1980, 81 or something. Just number 2, because it's so close to being my favourite horror of all time. But what pips it is this. John Carpenter, again, The Thing. And for me, the definitive horror movie. I struggle. I think it's perfect in every way. The story, the performances, the atmosphere, the location, the special effects. All of it is 10 out of 10. There's nothing wrong with it. It's such a good claustrophobic psychological horror. You trust no one, and he really captures that in it. I just think he captures the atmosphere of it all tremendously well, that you don't know who is who. And again, it doesn't mess around, gets straight to the cuts to the chase, and I just love it. Again, I'll watch it multiple times. I've got it on DVD. I've had it on various VHS. I've got 3 versions of it on Blu-ray, I think. This is the most recent, up-to-date one. I don't know whether there's any of the extras are any different to what's on the other ones, but I just like the different cover. It's without fault, and therefore, mine, brackets Green Sabre's favourite horror movie of all time. Right, I'm going to wrap that up here because I've twatted on for half an hour again. It was a pleasure doing that. The next video we'll get back to sort of more semblance of normality. There's going to be one, again, which is a kind of pick-up of the bands that influenced us. We're going to be going back into that for the bands that we forgot influenced us. And then after that, there might be a shorter one, basically on an update of where we are with recording and various bits and pieces. But until then, it's been a pleasure going through these spooky movies with you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheery bye.